Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with great major composers' artistic turning points. Yes, turning points, moments when their style underwent a revolution in aesthetics or direction or something musical that really mattered. It could be anything, but it's really, really important. And today we're talking about Beethoven. And when I started this series with Sibelius's Third Symphony, a couple people chimed in immediately with, oh, yes, well, we have to do Beethoven so you can talk about the Eroica. Wrong. The Eroica was not a turning point in Beethoven's symphonic development. It may have been a turning point in music generally. It may have been an important, vastly more important occurrence than the work in question here, but we're talking about musical turning points. The Eroica was a culmination. It was the epitome of what the classical symphony could do in Beethoven's hands, the most grandiose thing really he ever did, actually. But it wasn't a turning point. No, my friends. The turning point came with the Fourth Symphony. That lovely, charming, terrific, it's just delicious symphony that falls between 3 and 5 and that nobody wants to pay attention to. It uses a smaller orchestra than the Eroica, only 1 flute, 2 horns instead of 3, but it sounds bigger when it's going, actually, because Beethoven's scoring has become more confident and more fully realized in terms of the contrast between tutti and less noisy bits. There's that. But more to the point, the Fourth Symphony is the piece where Beethoven mastered 2 critical elements, which are somewhat at odds in the Eroica, not to its detriment. I mean, I know some of you will say, oh, well, Hurwitz just hates the Eroica. I don't hate the Eroica. It's a masterpiece. I don't love it as much as I love other things. That's just me. And I think it has problems. And the problems are solved in this symphony. Those problems are movement and proportion, formal proportion. All of those things have been resolved by the time Beethoven gets to the Fourth, and that's what makes it a turning point. Because in later works, he was able to capture all of the majesty, the grandeur, the Sturm und Drang of the Eroica, but stuff it into a much more shapely and dynamic form, which makes the music even more exciting. That's why Beethoven's Fifth is Beethoven's Fifth. It's because he had mastered his proportions. He'd gotten the feeling of movement right. He was able to harness the energy that he lets loose in the Eroica, but contain it in a way that makes the music even more powerful and more exciting because it's more highly contrasted and better timed. Timing is an issue. And I can show you that. I can show you that with some examples from the Fourth Symphony that I think make the case pretty strongly, which is why I mentioned it as part of this talk, of these talks. I know it may come as a surprise to some of you, but if you really listen to what's going on, I think you'll see that this argument makes sense. I really do. So let's just start with the beginning of the Fourth Symphony. An extraordinary introduction, unlike anything that had happened before in music, really, except for perhaps Haydn's introduction of chaos from the creation or something like that. You know, in the Eroica, Beethoven proved once and for all what Haydn had already done with his 12 London symphonies, which is that, at least in London, which was that the symphony could become the major part of the program. Not the operatic soloist, not the concerto thing, the symphony, the major thing. Beethoven consolidated and affirmed that in the Eroica. But it wasn't really his idea originally. That's why it wasn't a turning point, but rather a culmination. The Eroica was an epic event. You could not play, the Eroica along with a dozen other pieces. I mean, they would in Beethoven's day. They'd put the Eroica on with 20 other pieces. The concert would last 5 hours. I mean, it was nuts. But basically, if you really want to take in what the music is doing, then the Eroica sort of stands alone, doesn't it? That is true. And that's not true so much of the Fourth Symphony. It really isn't. But it's true of the Eroica. But listen to the opening introduction of the fourth. Just listen to this. It's music of timeless vastness. I mean, that's just there's nothing like it. Before, Weber, when he heard it, thought Beethoven was insane, actually, because it was just this long-held chord, spread out over several minutes of music. But wow, what is that? The mystery behind it. The feeling of latent energy and power, the bigness, it's just really, really quite exceptional and extraordinary. That is one element in this symphony. The idea of contrast between absolute stillness, absolute stasis, hugeness. You don't know where you are. You don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know anything. It's just big and powerful, but quiet. I could include this talk in classical music's greatest quiet climaxes, even though it's not a climax, it's the beginning of the work, but it has all of that pent-up feeling. And then the exposition explodes, quite literally. It doesn't blow up, but it bursts onto the scene with an exceptional amount of energy. And listen to the way Beethoven uses the orchestra when we play the exposition, the way the melodies are tossed off between the winds, even that one solo flute that makes such a huge difference in the color and texture of the entire exposition. It's amazing, really. But they're the incredible contrast between loud and soft in a very short span of time. And most importantly of all, perhaps, the way Beethoven arranges the exposition repeat, which is absolutely necessary and absolutely natural. He's finally figured out how to go back to the beginning without impeding the momentum that he's already established, which is a huge problem with the Eroica. The Eroica has the worst exposition repeat that Beethoven ever did. It's just sort of floating around, it's like nice and quiet. Then all of a sudden it just goes da-dum, and you're back to the beginning. It's horrible. That's why most people never do it, or for years never did it. Now they all do it. But back in the day, it was unheard of to take the exposition repeat because the movement was already tremendously long, but also because those first time bars are so gratuitous and unconvincing. Well, here, it could go round and round for days, and you would never lose the sense of energy or sense of momentum. So I'm going to play you the entire exposition, and you just hear the unbelievable momentum that Beethoven builds up and sustains through the entire passage, whether it's loud or soft or whatever's going on, and then the return to the beginning. And you'll hear, I think, exactly what I mean by his mastery of proportion and of movement, of getting the music to move. Here it is. that was the Nicholas Esterhazy Sinfonia under Bela Drahos, the Naxos Beethoven cycle, which is actually quite good for the most part. And the music speaks for itself. It really does. And so it continues throughout the symphony. The slow movement is a full-scale rondo. So was the Funeral March in the Eroica, actually. I mean, it's a rondo type thing. But this one has, again, that feeling of it just keeps going. It's fantastic. The energy that the music never dissipates. It has no dead spots. I mean, with all due respect to the Funeral March from the Eroica, it can have dead spots. It requires some help in performance. It could be devastatingly thrilling. And then the last two movements of this symphony are compatible with what has come before. They're in proportion. That is, they're neither too long nor too short. The scherzo goes around twice. It has a little extra zots in the trio and return to the scherzo, which is marvelous. We get a little bit more of that rhythmic energy that Beethoven has finally learned to deploy, and the finale is absolutely marvelous. It's a perpetual motion, chugga 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 chugga, you know, like that, with inexorable and inevitable power that just drives straight to the end, unlike the Eroica's somewhat patchwork finale, which is, you know, I mean, it's variations and a fugue and things, and it you know, and the coda is kind of attached to the rest of it. And all of these things are not to say that the Eroica is bad or wrong, or I'm not trying to say that. What I'm trying to say is that Beethoven has mastered a new technique in this symphony. That's what makes it a turning point. And once mastered, he never turned back. He understood how to take these techniques and apply them to something as powerful as the Eroica, something as tormented as the Eroica, and everything else that came after. He never set a foot wrong. He never forgot a lesson once learned, which was, of course, one of his greatest gifts as a genius, as an artist. So there you have it, my friends. Beethoven's symphonic turning point. Not perhaps what you expected, but I think on reflection, a correct assessment of the importance of the Fourth Symphony in Beethoven's symphonic journey and in the aesthetics of his music more generally. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.